of like a necessity that demands an ethical standpoint from those of us who tend to find human relationships to be so messy that we just don't want to look at them, and we bury our issues in technological fascination. Yeah.
I mean,
you know what I mean? I mean, we're typical, and yet all of these things that we're building are what it is that other people are going to rely on in the future. And so we have to have some sort of question of the humanity and meat space. And I don't want to provoke you with it, but I really want to hear your thoughts about it as somebody who definitely is aware of what it is that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That tone of voice is a little bit unfair.
Thank you. It's amazing asking this question. I mean, again, the cynical quick answer would be that I politely hereby refuse to take your criticism and think of myself as socially inept, and I would say that others and the masses are, if they are not neurotypical, maybe they should be. That's sort of the really horrible answer. But
Yasha next to me says exactly the same thing.
I mean, let's kind of break it down, because this is kind of a blatantly cheeky elitist response. I think I kind of pretend to have at least a big capacity for self-reflection, and knowing that my neuroatypicality and my vices, you know, whether they are relevant in my decisions or not, or whether they are kind of, let's cut to the chase, whether they kind of potentially have ill impact on the progress through what I expressed with technology. I mean, let's be a bit kind of immodest here, and let's pretend that I have any amount of influence on this. Is this what you're asking, kind of?
Exactly what I'm asking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here I would like to emphasize that these are the questions where ideology becomes kind of really important to a certain extent, because in general we say that we are ideology neutral, but the ideology which I'm referring to is basically like, I know that it has a lot of unliked terms like individualism or objectivism, etc. But I don't see a better rational strategy which is fair to other individuals, in the sense that fair being that all I can say is that I recognize them as having the same capacities to decide what they desire and what they want as me. I don't have a better solution.
I think that's a fair perspective.
I don't have a better approach to
demand, actually, that people step up and take responsibility for making choices. Greg wants to ask a question. Gregor, you want to come back on screen and ask your question?
Yeah, wasn't so much a question, more just a comment, maybe to illustrate what you were also asking before when we were speaking about identity. So the way how I see it, on the level of swarm, as Victor said, who has the private key is the identity in essence, But then you have like this next level where you actually, yes, you touch the humans, you touch with the applications you design with the end users. And at that level, you have also then identity solutions like Ident3 or any others coming in. And there comes like this kind of different plurality of identities, because then the entity is actually put in the social context. On the level of swarm is academia and chunks. Mm-hmm. Does this make sense? Victor, would you agree?
Absolutely.
Can I add to this? This is Stefan. I would like to add that when we talk about identity, we also need to think about the function of identity. So why do we actually want to know that some entity is the same as it was a week ago, right?
Exactly.
I mean, truly trustless solutions actually obviate the need for that, but often you have the best predictor for future behavior is past behavior. So kind of some sort of audit trail of or reputation, call it. It's kind of not bad to have. I mean, after all, kind of honest signaling and all these kind of um, behavior solutions are exactly based on the fact that it's useful to have a constant model of others and or either institutions or personas and attach some sort of reliability to them, and it helps your interaction and optimize your ways about. So it's sometimes important to attach. The problem is that there's no choice often, because the only way to identify yourself is by leaking too much information about your real world identity, and then often puts you in a fragile and a vulnerable position. But in fact, I'm leaning. I'm not so serious about this necessarily, but I'm kind of leaning towards a kind of total transparency uh, view, in which, I mean, just to go back to I think you asked Gregor the question of are we not already screwed with all this information linked about us? I would say that not at all. If it's made open source, then kind of all the most of the advantage, okay, is dissolved. I'm call me naive, of course, whether it happens in any foreseeable future, but it's
Sig, you need to jump in here. I'm watching your face the whole time, and I'm watching your brain tick, and I really want to know. I really want to know what's going on inside that mortal coil, man.
I would only add one thing really, which is I think when we're talking about interacting with humans, the tech interacting with humans, then something that's of note is the kind of shift change that the blockchain has given us, in the sense that it's a consensus mechanism and it's set up this unbreakable technological precedent to be able to collaboratively form a ledger and anything else that gets built on top of it. And I think that's the massive shift change that we're kind of all riding on here, is the ability for mass cooperation. And what Victor's building is an extension of that. So that's what excites me about the potential to build societies on top of it.
Cool. I like that thought, because, you know, so often the motivation from those of us that are in the community about why we're here, and the people that inspire us and the tech that inspire us, sort of like, you know, gets left behind, you know. I know that I'm here because I'm inspired by people and their thoughts and their explorations, you know. So thank you for saying that. Yeah. Grace, do you have another place that you want to go with this?
I've been thinking a lot about that highly offensive comment by Vinay Gupta that you brought up. And
yeah, people react to him that way.
well, he's a good man, right? But the calling out of certain percentage of, you know, even saying a large percentage of the people in this group of developers are weirdos is a funny thing.
No. Weirdos is not fair, okay?
I know what he said, right? We have a certain spectrum in terms of our sensitivity to other human beings, right? So calling that out, it's fascinating. It's so fascinating, because we're talking about an individual who's, I think, a UK educated lawyer, has done very well in the investment community, right?
No,
so somebody
he's not a lawyer. He is a Scot of Indian descent. Yeah. Has no legal background at all.
Okay. Oh, so he does something that's in the legal field. He's not in that. So but I think that in some ways, if we think about the people who are considered normal, who have been governing, right, and have been making decisions for the human beings around here, one of the disadvantages of those people is that they have these ideas that their opinions are correct.
Well, we have our opinions, and we believe that our opinions are correct as well. That's
but
a valid criticism. Yeah.
Well, I would say that there's more of a tendency, if you're a little more emotionally neutral, to say things like Victor said, which is, look,
It's not emotionally neutral, because Beyond Good and Evil was a long time part of his bio profile.
What I mean about emotionally neutral is that you might have what he was pointing at, right, is that some people in this community have a more limited range of emotional sensitivity to other people. And I think that gives an opening for statements like what Victor said, is like, we're neutral to what people do with the system. It's not upon us to judge what people are doing with our infrastructure. Our infrastructure should be emotionally neutral. Our infrastructure should be ethically neutral, and it should just be a building block. And I think that there may be an advantage to that. But I also think that, I think it's a silly judgment in general, because we're all, there's nothing normative about anybody unless they're really, really trying very hard. But I just think that it's not, I think whether it's a fair judgment or not, I don't think it actually is as problematic, and it might be better than people who are strongly emotional.
I don't know that it's I think that's an unfair criticism. I think he's raising the question for discussion. It's less of a criticism and more of a potential warning. But let me reframe the debate that you and I are having, and I'd like to take some time to familiarize yourself with Vinay, because he's an old partner of mine early. I'd like to frame this more in the technological solution area. Yeah. So we're having this human debate and looking at different questions in this area. I'm more interested in where Victor sees that in place of the design of Swarm. Yeah. And he's very clearly said that it's unfair to characterize himself as being a unemotional or uninvolved, unempathetic person to the human condition. And it was a fair reaction. I was not meaning to be provocative. I was meaning to just raise the point.
But I can take the other direction. So on the other hand, like I'm kind of strive to be in terms of strive to be what we're accused of, in a way. And I think it has an advantage. So being kind of let me even put it in a stronger way. So to some extent, incapacity to deal with the kind of emotional or like having on a low scale of emotional sensitivity is actually a motivation to actually it's most often the result of recognizing that it's hard to navigate in those areas with the rational mind, and those aspects of systems that are rationally designed are best left at that, because that's where they do the best. If we I mean, there's the whole thing about this DAO and the DAO fork. We can go back all the way down there. If the idea is to have a vehicle which can enforce certain rules, then the whole point of is kind of moot, if you allow the kind of the theater of social I mean theater of politics and social conviction invited. So I mean, which kind of translates in kind of simple terms to invite social governance to blockchain based solutions is a kind of a mistake in a way. Even though ultimately
that's literally the sentence core of the question. Yeah.
Say again. Sorry, I thought over you.
Literally the one sentence core of the question is whether a human element belongs in the question of governance or not.
I mean, you know, my moral philosophy is very simple. I mean, it's like so it doesn't need too much coordination and debating often. I mean, I'm not saying that there's no moral dilemmas, but as long as we don't aggress with each other, then it should be our business what we do, and that's pretty much goes for everything and every domain in the world, and all other things that people adhere to in terms of rules, they should be kind of voluntary and local and
so I guess a primary thing about parallelly Polis as a concept and crypto anarchism as a concept, which is what it is that I've packaged my most recent effort in the scene, is that it's based on non-coercion,
exactly
opting in,
and it's not only simple and clean, but that's it. So it's like it's quite a strength in a moral imperative, which is exhaustive in one sentence. You know, its applicability is very powerful, and I would even consider that as like when you talk about money, and you don't talk about the actual backing asset, but you talk about the properties of money. In this sense, I think such moral systems which have one axiom are much better systems than the ones that have millions of legal of millions of pages of legalese and stuff like this. So, I mean, okay, I mean simplifying things, and I'm kind of being
no, it's really good to simplify them on that level, and I'm really glad that we're getting here, because so often the engineering and the technological implementations that we're doing keep us away from these questions. I'm really thankful for this intimacy, because taking it away from the criticism, the neurotypical trigger there, it's clear that we're all attempting to build human systems, and I'm glad that we got to this point, because it's clear for me that's what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, I like that we go into this ideological way, but ultimately we're gonna disappoint, because what I say is that the philosophical, or like the ideological stance here is that we shouldn't exert any kind of ideological standpoint really too much, because that creates the most value if we remain neutral, if we leave it for all the lower level forces to fight this, whatever they want. It's a bit like when sorry, I just went to
no, please don't ever apologize, because I think that the organization of what I looked at in the Book of Swarm, the way it's laid out, the way it starts from square one and the way it goes to square 10, has a deeply grounded a deeply grounded historical argumentation. It starts from first principles and goes through implementations, and ends with a summary that represents a certain frame of reference that it's obvious that you come from. And I'd rather draw you out to actually warmly give that as a person, in addition to the absolutely mathematical precision of what it is that you've presented as the work of the team of people that are building this thing that we've been waiting so long for, I think it's absolutely central, actually, to the ethical framework and the humanistic framework of Ethereum that interests me far more than the Ian Grigg maximalist and Nick Szabo maximalist school of Bitcoin. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
it's a fundamental difference of how it is that we're designing systems and data transfer and identity and sovereignty and everything. Yeah, it's such a clear representation.
On the other hand, I would be less committed on some of these ethical norms than for example, Gregor. So we often have a debate with Gregor about some basic things, which I often surprise him with not agreeing, codifying some sort of things which he believes are ethical norms. Just because I think codifying them is actually harmful. But
I have a problem with codifying things as well. See, I feel as though humans are messy. Yeah, we're really messy, and we're designing systems that are intended to cope with that messiness and account for them and to calculate them in game theoretical, tokenized, monetized, uh, um, you know, uh, metaphors. Um,
Here it's really, that's why when I also speak about fair data stack and these kind of mental models, it's I think with many of the things we need to acknowledge that we are on a kind of a spectrum, pun intended. So what I mean with this is, if we look at the base layer like Swarm, so I as Gregor as human, I will never keep notes of the chunks of the 4 kilobyte chunks on I don't know which computers. It's just like Victor before said, computers are better at some things, like calculating prime numbers or managing that chunk goes from A to B. So at that level, it should be codified. It should give like this stability and trust. But then when we go up one level and we actually start to discuss what is privacy and how we interact as a society, how we collaborate, then things get fuzzier. And again, it's like when we speak about businesses as the third layer, it gets even more opinionated. So here I a lot of times give like this comparison between farmers market and restaurants. So I go to farmers market, I want to have this neutrality, but when I go to a restaurant, I want to have this opinionated stuff, and this is the spectrum. So I think we should. It's looking at these layers. We can define these properties a lot better.
Yeah. Let's jump into a controversial question here. That's a concrete example. For example, when you mention privacy, I'm a strong proponent, and I think we should aspire to educate people and provide very strong solutions to empower them with the option of being private. On the other hand, I think I don't think of violations of privacy as something that should be, for example, legally or protected by the social institutions that we maintain from collective contribution. So because I think it's a waste of money and waste of time. It's pretty much like copyright protection.
God, man, that's a great one. Copyright protection and patent protection. When we came from, an original concept of creating copyright and patents so that we have public goods and commons goods. I mean,
if you see through this, you always know that this has been demagogic justifications which are completely not based on anything really.
It's based only on securing, monopolies on monetary income over generations. That's clear.
Well,
Great.
I think
Jumping up and down there, man. Jump into this one.
yeah, I think that what we're talking about is functionality versus outcomes. And I think there's a lot of place for being much more analytical about outcomes when we build systems. And so if you say copyright law as an example, instead of having, you can have a copyright law or a copyright code or a copyright whatever, and if you say, well, the purpose is to create more public goods, and we're going to measure that every 3 months and see when it starts going downhill, then you've got a very different system than here's the law. And the same thing might go for AML, right? With the anti-money laundering laws, which are 99.4% ineffective at preventing money laundering. And so sometimes the government gets together and tries to reform them, but most of us, if they had something that was 99.4% ineffective, would throw it out, especially if it's as expensive as all that, right? So if we said, okay, well, we want to create privacy and we have some ideas about data privacy, but what we're going to measure is how much people participate in things that are important. For example, submitting data about what their symptoms are, if we give them more privacy and if we give them less privacy, and how that looks. And if so, you want to start taking a look, rather than creating systems that are policy based, that they would be more results based. And I think from that perspective, this is one of the areas where being a little, standing back a bit and being like, what are the numbers saying to us? Are people getting happier or sadder, right? If we're only looking at GDP, is growth really good for people or bad for people? And we know those things now, but we don't shift our policies because the policies are dominant over the results. And I think that we can create systems that, rather than code is law or policy is law, that are much more like results are what we're looking at, and then we can make modifications to our code or to our habits.
But Grace,
aligned with this real result.
Yeah, Grace, if I can connect with that, often the problem is often that these systems are so complex, and often we set our goals in terms of an objective which already doesn't make sense on some higher level. So let me tell you an example. Does it make sense to strive to have some sort of regulations about the type of cup that you have for a pill that you buy in the pharmacy? Do you think that it's kind of prudent to protect consumers and kind of prescribe certain preferences for how the cup is put on, in particular for protection of children, that they cannot open things very easily and they won't end up swallowing a bottle of sleeping pills and die? Yeah, does it make sense? And often policies on this level are kind of debated, and what's often missed is that instead of someone second guessing in a kind of we preconceive institutions which are making decisions on what these kind of policies should be and what our objectives should be, and what we should focus on, and start the things that you mentioned, like take the data and count, like, okay, are these people are satisfied or not? Instead of that, we should strive for first principles, like try to create systems where information flow is most information access and information flow is free as possible. It's unobstructed. There's no artificial narrowing in the system, and also simply voluntary interactions have the most liquidity that you can imagine. If you take care of these first two principles, you often liberate yourself from having to second guess solutions to actual problems.
And
because
that's my exact point. I feel as though when I looked at the outline of the Book of Swarm, that's exactly what you did. Is that you started from first principles.
yes, yes, and in general, the idea is to. I mean, Swarm is. I mean, let's not pretend that it's like the savior of the world in any sense, but it's a little contribution to bring a lot of services, lots of productivity applications which can help businesses, people's lives, and bring the barrier of entry much lower. And on the one hand, and on the other hand, with some sort of principled way of interaction or forced compatible APIs, so to say, provide synergy to allow, and this word that I don't really like, but exponential growth possibility of really making the interaction.
Let's call it network effect instead of exponential growth.
And just to say to Grace that I often fear that when we kind of pick on a problem and try to solve it in this kind of, I mean, for example, healthcare is my favorite example, which is most often even my most learned and very smart friends kind of have absolutely crazy ideas about what healthcare is and how what people should do in terms of healthcare. And often I think that what we find as a how should I put it? For a socially sensitive person, it's often a bit of a trap, because often healthcare problems are framed in terms of things which are kind of which you're almost invited to react emotionally because everyone has or supposed to have a sense of compassion. So when it comes to you don't want to aid the old and the feeble, then of course it comes through as social insensitivity, and we're back to the point of the insensitive geek that is kind of not.
Let's get topical. And let's bring this back into now and today. Yeah. What does Swarm offer to mitigate the threats that we face by increased personal tracking and data collection that is on one side necessary to deal with an obvious threat to our biological existence, as counteracted by our political values of privacy and security and things for the individual? How does what you're doing with Swarm offer a solution to those of us that were pitching, to adopt our systems to balance the needs of the state or the needs of the population, the needs of civilization to deal with this current evolutionary threat that we're dealing with, yet keeping the democratic values that it is that we've been trying to institute over the last 100 or 200 years?
I don't know. I mean, offering privacy is a very important stepping point, because then you have a choice, and then you can opt in to all kinds of schemes of sharing data about yourself. So kind of self-sovereignty about data that you produce or that your activities leave as a trace is super important. And I think there's no better person to talk about this and the repercussions than Gregor.
I agree. I agree with that. So and Gregor's made his position clear, and we can give him some time to talk more about that. But I have a more direct question.
Yes.
Is our target market as builders, communicators of these technological solutions, is our target market decision makers, or is our target market users? Because you talk about people having a choice, and and I feel like there's a gatekeeper role happening in the current structure of civilization, that politicians and corporations are making delegated decisions for users based on the exchange of, we get your data for providing you with free services. It's a real core question. Yeah.
Okay, so a cheeky answer again. So I think the best way to mitigate the pitfalls resulting from monopolies over large data, basically the data silo problem, is to be able to do it ourselves, and be able to not do it if we want to opt out. In the end, I would almost argue that it's kind of having this data and processing this data is going to be is ending up more valuable than it is harmful in general. So I'm kind of I believe that we're often going to be better off opting in a system that monitors our behavior, but having any one single entity taking the benefit of that is kind of is not needed simply. So this kind of distortion that this kind of inequality this causes is a historical fact of the it's a kind of necessity out of the bootstrapping of the logistics needing for that simply. So simply only bigger entities were able to hold and process this kind of data. This is how the problem was bootstrapped, and that because of the network effect, we often get the lockdown syndrome. Sorry, not lockdown syndrome. What is it?
Yeah. So
locked into using certain platforms.
So I'm looking at both Gregor and Grace, and I'm watching their brains tick. And Victor's on a longer trajectory than Grace, in my opinion. Give me what it is that's going on in your head with what Victor's talking about, Grace.
I don't know what you mean by a longer trajectory, but I think even the name swarm and everything that Victor's pointing at is that these structures that were put in after World War II are crumbling and inadequate to take care of the currents of the problems. So even your question, should it be for the people or, for the users or the leaders? I'm like, what leaders? Those people aren't my leaders. Those people have lost their way, right? And
people who are in positions of power to make decisions or implement legislation or incentivize economic systems with the power of monopoly. That's more what I mean. People that are in position to implement things that affect a vast majority of the population.
We're at a very bizarre crossroads, or a very interesting time.
I agree.
And what we're seeing currently with the pandemic is the systems that have power doing everything they can to hold on to that power. And they don't really have it anymore. And the moment that they will not have it anymore is when we can break off and have our own economic systems. And we have the technology to do it, but we don't have the thought processes yet. And most of us—
I disagree with you. We have it. We're already living in a parallel society that was started by Bitcoin, which is birthed other systems. Yeah.
I completely disagree with you.
Yeah.
And the reason I disagree with you is that our parallel society is not self-sustainable, and there are people who can turn the switch off.
I agree with you, the fact that it's not self-sustainable, and I agree with you that maybe that the switch can be turned off. I'd like to direct this more to I'd like to ask you a direct question. Would you like to see the state implement the solutions that we're building, or would you prefer to see corporate guild interests implement these solutions?
Neither.
Do you see the state? Okay, so you really would prefer to see the pure anarchism of individual contracts that we all enter with each other that somehow messily create a consensus? Or would you prefer to see something that really provides, like Victor mentioned, public health care and water and electricity, and the classic trigger argument about that the libertarians argue, who's going to build the roads? Who do you want to build the roads? Do you want it to be us as messy collectivists, or a centralized state, or centralized corporate control?
I think that the only sustainable answer is a messy anarchism, but that we're really only at the very, very beginning of understanding how that works. And I think that that centralized states are just never going to be reactive enough to save the environment, to handle pandemics.
Proactive. Would
What?
you find a state if we could make a state proactive the way it is that we as builders are proactive? Would you stand behind that type of state?
Well, how would you define a state? When we look at any challenge, if you look at some things that are going, if you look at a natural system like our body, very complex, right? And some things are dealt with locally, right? Like in my stomach, digestion is handled, okay? And not with all the other systems. So I have these delegated systems within my system. And then I like to think I have some central controller. It's not really the central controller.
With the metaphor and the simile, but without each of those individual, so local systems making decisions for themselves, the whole organism can't function. Yeah.
It will. I think that we can create networks that do function in that way. And I think that we're just at the beginning of discovering what that's going to look like. But I think that so what we've been doing is this weird delegation, like I'm delegating to my mayor or my president, and then they're delegating to the UN. I think we can come to a much more direct type of democracy or anarchism. I think that we can operate at the level.
We're doing all this delegation stuff in the financial side of blockchains. We're doing proof of stake. We're doing, Aragon Colony, DAO Stack DAOs. We're doing this delegation stuff on the financial side of blockchain. Yeah.
I disagree in a couple of ways. So
I love this. I live these moments.
The first way I disagree is that having a system where we never define the problem set and we just go, anybody propose anything and we're going to vote on the money, that's not a normal decision-making system. No organism or organization ever makes a decision by like, hey, everybody say what you want and then we'll all vote.
Thanks for saying that.
Right? Like, it's not how anything makes a decision, okay? So we have automated something, but basically what we've created is sophisticated multi-sig wallets, okay? That's what it is. That's the truth. And I like these guys. They started out with such really great intentions, and maybe they'll make something great, but it's a very excellent first attempt, okay? Really excellent for a first attempt. The second way in which I disagree is that we have not fundamentally rethought what money is. With the exception of Holochain, nobody in this space has fundamentally rethought, wait a second, if we were to invent currency, if we were to reinvent how we transact, what would that look like? Instead, we've based our entire system on speculative currencies, bonding curves, all kinds of things that are fundamentally speculative and not backed by reality. So we've put ourselves in an even more volatile monetary system than the existing monetary system, more fragile and more volatile, with artificial things like, oh, there should be some global truth, which there isn't. And so we've created this system which we have so much potential to truly rethink what is money, but we didn't. And so as long as we're still aligning our ideas with money, with the conventional system money, we're almost locked into that system.
Okay, but I don't necessarily agree that we're aligning ourselves with what is money in the same way. I think that that happened in Bitcoin. I think that that's much less true of Ethereum. Yeah. I think that what is money discussion about Ethereum is pretty secondary to just about anybody that I think is important in building the systems and pitching the systems to people. Yeah. I think that all of the discussions that I've had today with ETH people have been based around enablement for a globalized, globalized, accessible proof of state, proof of consensus. Yeah, it has very, very little to do with money.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
that's
so,
fine. But you can't keep ignoring that and think we're going to create a new system. We need to create a new financial economic system in which we can transact with one another. Now, we may transact in data, we may transact in reputation, we may transact in many different kinds of measurements. But until we have a way to do that that's different from Bitcoin, we'll call it, I'm just going to call it Bitcoin for now, we are still thinking about money the same way that our current systems think about money, which is fundamentally an extractive nature money. And, Michelle Bowens talked about this, right? Different kinds of accounting, kinds of wealth accounting. So that was the focus of what
I missed that. I invited
him
to come because of his epic history. Yeah.
So I talked about that in the slot that he was supposed to talk, and then he talked about that from a totally different angle in the slot that he actually spoke in. So we spoke a bit about different value measurement systems, and that's something that these cryptocurrencies, we do have the potential to create new value measurement systems, and when we do, then we can really have a parallel society.
Cool. So let's bring this right down to the level of Swarm. How does Swarm enable what it is that Grace is talking about? Because I think that it comes from that place. This is so core for us to tell people how it is that data management, data distribution, data maintenance contributes to that specific goal that it is that we share in common with each other, Victor.
I would just go back to the previous one, that to make all the kinds. First of all, the recognition that data is more and more important, and more of the economy will be based around how you deal with data. Kind of, because most of the decision, often the business value is in data exchange and data aggregation. And if you as an individual, you can both express your needs with the system that allows you to interact in the most free ways with most other individuals or systems.
Sovereign.
So basically, you have let's say you have as free a market as possible, and as free flow of information as possible. It's the best you can do. It's basically to create the least amount of stickiness in the system in terms of so
where does Swarm remove friction in this equation?
Where does it what? Sorry.
Where does Swarm remove exactly this friction in enabling that path towards sovereignty? Because we live in a world of gatekeepers that are monetizing all of this human interaction. So, and that I consider that to be friction. We talk all the time about how it is that DeFi removes friction from the banking system, while it is that everybody is just replicating a future version of what it is that we already have.
So it's a modest contribution in a way, but it's very fundamental if you think about it. So to basically give the entire logistics of data processing a potentially trustless and zero barrier of entry kind of decentralized basis is very close to equalizing or leveling the playing field in a way. I know that there's a lot of power in in historical inertia. But luckily, with data, the more recent the data is, the more valuable. So ultimately, the kind of old data gathered will have exponential decay in terms of relevance. So there's a fair chance that it's a bit unlike like real estate or something, which kind of, if you have a lot of them, then you're likely to remain quite rich for foreseeable future. But if you have all the data of me, including my heart rate and all the data about me going to the gym and whatever data that you collect about me, we're going to be more and more irrelevant tomorrow and the week after and next year and 10 years from now. So there's a quite a quick turnover in terms of relevance of what's the basis for economic power, and that gives us a fair chance that the powers to be can be replaced with more fairer. So basically to keep data processing and data aggregation the most efficient as possible in terms of all the services, since they are zero barrier of entry and very easy to integrate. They have basically, and because of the trustless, they don't need upfront investment in terms of infrastructure, because it's self-scaling. That's a very important property. Even though a lot of Web2 services already provide that to some extent, but the fact that they will end up with in the same buckets and distort the other side of how this is spent, and if it's also compensated with, complemented with the ability of people to go into interactions the way they see fit. So having cryptocurrency as the accounting basic basis of accounting, having identity and having simply the opportunity to communicate each other and basically advertise themselves in whatever way they see fit. I think this is already a huge potential for progress, because this allows for a lot of extension of domains of free trade and free interaction, which is not only economically very potential, very big potential, but also conduit for world peace, after all. No?
This is so awesome. My friends, my colleagues, my peers, I dream of days like this to have these sort of conversations. Thank you so
very nice.
much for coming here and participating in this. You are bringing such joy and meaning to my life to be doing what you're doing and thinking about these things and talking about them here at NonCon. I literally want to cry at the beauty and joy and thankfulness that I feel to meet all of you here and interact with you. Yeah.
Same here. Thank you, my friend.
Yeah.
Thank you, Grace, and Dan.
Amazing. I think we should let it go, man.
Yeah, let's yeah, we got to make it to that 11 o'clock one tomorrow morning, right?
And you have to come to the party.
Julie's going to show us the Crypto Voxels party that's going on right now.
Yeah, just follow the link I posted. It's really, really easy. Even if you don't come with your MetaMask logged in, you can still join the party.
Yeah.
Okay.
Victor, I've waited so long to meet you and have this conversation. I've been intellectually and emotionally invested in the idea of Swarm for so many years. And I've been so frustrated at the lack of public communication of what it is that you've been building with your team over these years. Thank you so much for everything that you've done. And thank you so much for agreeing to present the Book of Swarm here tonight. Thank you so much to Gregor for fair data and being a part of this. Thank you so much to Grace for your absolutely broad vision of what it is that we're discussing here. Stefan for being here, and Julie for adding color and attention to what it is that we're doing. Man, you guys have made my day and made this whole conference worth it. Thank you so much from the deepest place in my heart.
My pleasure.
Thank you for putting this together, Michael.
And where's that party link, by the way?
The party link, I posted it in the chat. I will post it again. It's so much happening in the chat. It's cool.
Yeah.
Bye-bye, guys.
Last person that's been here, David, I'm sorry I don't know you, and I know that you're part of this intellectually, emotionally, and technically. Thank you also for being here. And a big up to Daniel, also known as N1 and Nice, for doing now 12 hours of streaming. Daniel, say hi to everybody, and thank you so much for sitting here and doing it all day long. Yeah. Thanks. Unbelievable. I can't believe this whole thing worked, Ben.
It did.
Yeah, I was also skeptical in the beginning, but now I'm really, yes, it's really cool.
The interface is so great. I'm sorry I can't resist, but Grace, I have so to disagree with you about what you said about the community thinking about money. Yeah. I'm looking forward to continue this discussion at another time, maybe.
There's no reason why you can't do it right now where you're feeling it. We can keep going, and we can on YouTube. Don't run away, Stefan. Go ahead and do it, man.
I don't run away, but I don't want to piggyback on your nice speech, basically. Leaving us all into the party.
It's okay, because the girl there that you see there, Julie, is our video editor who's going to be editing all of these talks. And we can just stop it after my beautiful message, and we can add this debate or discussion between you and Grace. And I'm not going to let you run away, Stefan.
No. I'm happy to stay. So my point is that at least for me and a few others that I know, crypto was really the pathway, the portal into starting to think about what money actually is. So I heavily disagree with the notion that the community has not thought about the functions of money and the meaning of money and the design space that we have when transacting with each other. And I think a lot of the community are fully aware that we have a unique opportunity to redesign the very basics, the fundamentals of economy here. And that's what's happening. I think that's what's happening.
I agree with that statement. As far as the thought process, I think that it's taken a step in the right direction, but I think it's a small step. I think there's some things that it took me 2 years to start thinking differently about this. I think there's some things that are just really hard to unthink because we're so brainwashed. And so I think we're stepping in the right direction, but I think that, one of the projects that I'm doing right now is to try to talk to young people, like 15 to 20, about these things, hoping that they're less brainwashed than me and they can see some things that I can't see. Because I do have this feeling like we're scratching the surface of something.
I think if you go down that rabbit hole, at some point you will always have the feeling that we are all doing too little, and we could all do much more. Of course,
that's a version of the imposter syndrome.
That's very true. But I agree. So talking to young people is a very good way to reframe where you are coming from. So I think about my kids. When I'm waiting for the day when I can transact with crypto with them, right? So that's really and it's happening.
We had the question of inheritance here at Parallel to Polis like 6 weeks ago.
Yeah. I've been thinking about inheritance a lot, and from all kinds of different angles, and even from a product perspective. It's an interesting problem. And the funny thing is that none of the notaries in Austria or of the judges in Austria have any clue what is coming to them. Nobody can deal with this in a way. Yeah. So there are it's a lot of work to do. I fully agree on that.
You know, they installed Zoom now. They installed now Zoom.
No, man, forget Zoom.
No, I'm just referring to what Stefan said, that none of these notaries and judges know what is coming to them, you know. And I just wanted to say, like, within the last month, they probably at least installed Zoom or something like that, you know. So
okay, but I also
steps towards
I remember my parents telling me what was coming for me, and I didn't listen to them either.
Yeah, you can't talk to your own children about this stuff. I have proof, but you can start to talk to other people's kids if they come to you. But your own kids, it's hopeless.
I can basically just give the pocket money to my kids in a different way, you know.
I remember you saying you give it to them and die, and that they actually use it.
Exactly.
So let's take that a step forward. So these sort of like things that we're implementing as examples or as forced, this is the way that you can buy your PlayStation, pocket money. They will carry fruit into the future.